Warm welcome to everyone. My name is Alfredo Cramerotti. I'm the president of the IKT International Association of Curators of Contemporary Art, and a very warm welcome to this IKT webinar. With me, there are the speakers and the moderator who will introduce you briefly, and also Carolina Bailey-Hughes, who has organized this event. This webinar is the fourth of the first series of webinars after the first open call we did. And this is the last one of the first series. We have already open and closed a second application for webinar. We selected 2 more webinars. We will announce it shortly. But now I would like you to focus on this important webinar, challenges and opportunities in inclusive curating, so art by disabled, deaf, and neurodiverse artists. The webinar was actually proposed by Miguel Amado, who's with us today, and a curator and writer, director of the Serious Arts Center and in Ireland, and who will also do the moderation of the panel. After his opening remarks, we will have Elinor Morgan, curator and writer, and associate curator for research and strategic partnership at MIMA in Middlesbrough in the UK, followed by Aidan Moesby, independent curator, artist, and writer. And to finish this list of glorious speakers, Róisín Power Hackett, artist, writer, and curator, and the Program Support Office at Art and Disability Ireland. Without further ado, we still have people logging in, so we'll just let them come in. But I would ask Miguel to open this webinar officially with his remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alfredo. It's an honor and a pleasure to be able to convene this webinar for IKT. I'm an old member of IKT, maybe in the last 20 years or so. I've been part of the boards, and it was, I received with great enthusiasm and the fact that the current board and team is organizing these sessions, which I also attended on a couple of occasions. So I really want to thank Alfredo, all the board members at the moment, and Carolina for the opportunity and for the support. I also want to thank my colleagues and friends, Elinor Morgan, Aidan Moesby, and Róisín Power Hackett, who are the speakers of the session today. Not only for being leading practitioners in the UK and Ireland, who I respect and follow, but also for the time, energy, and generosity they are offering us by sharing their thoughts on the topic that we're going to discuss. Finally, I want to thank you all for joining us today. It's very impressive to see so many of you coming together on this afternoon, wherever you are at the time you are, and just your presence demonstrates the relevance of the questions we are going to address, but also the support that all of you are giving us and others working in the field. For those of you who are not part of IKT, I strongly recommend becoming part of IKT. It's an important fundamental organization that supports and develops the practice of curation, and it's a fundamental networking and knowledge sharing platform for all of us. I'll be brief because I want to give the space and platform to our colleagues who are speaking today, and also enable a Q&A with all of us. But I would like to share that the idea for this session comes from my direct experience, my direct professional experience of working with an artist who is affiliated with an organization in Ireland called KCAT Art Centre. And KCAT Art Centre is a supported studio. Terminology is something of interest. We will discuss probably what supported studio means. And there are other organizations of the same kind in the UK, in Ireland, United States, and elsewhere. So the reason I started working with this artist is that I was invited in 2020, 6 years ago, around this time, 6 years ago, I was invited by another organization in Ireland called Arts in Disability Ireland to be part of a scheme they had been organizing, which I read in a simple way, a way of pairing mainstream curators working independently or in organizations with artists who would be who would have lived experience of disability. And I was paired, so I didn't select the artists I would work with. I was paired by someone at Arts in Disability Ireland in collaboration with another organization called Fire Station Artist Studio. They were running the program together. I was paired with an artist called Fergus Fitzgerald, and at the time also Vukasin Nedelkovic. And this was 2020, just before the first lockdown of COVID-19 in Ireland and elsewhere in Europe. So it became quite complicated at the time to actually understand how to work in these conditions. And what happened is that Fergus, through KCAT Art Center, we met online, I think in May 2020. And I felt the need and the interest to continue the conversation with him. And across 5 years, we met regularly at KCAT. Here I am with Fergus and a colleague of mine at the time, Sarah Long. And we also offered an opportunity for Fergus to come to Curators Art Center and be in residency. This was the first time an artist from KCAT Art Center was in residency elsewhere. And he spent time with us, supported by a local artist who was working as his artistic mentor, and by a support worker from Camp Hill community where Fergus lives. And after these 5 years of engagement, we organized his first retrospective exhibition at Curators Art Center, which launched in the summer of last year. And here you can see very briefly different Fergus, different colleagues and other artists from KCAT Art Center, managers from KCAT Art Center, and representatives of Arts in Disability Ireland and Cork County Council Arts Office. So throughout these 5 years, while I was familiar with discourse, practices, resources in the UK where I had worked previously, here you can see 2 slides, one by a book by Jade French called Inclusive Curating, which we are quoting in the title of this webinar. And you are also seeing a screenshot of a webinar organized by as part of an organization called DASH, which we'll hear about, and Aidan is actually leading this webinar, and the title was quite interesting as well, Curating Institutional Change. So while I was familiar with this from previous times in the UK, but also working in Ireland and trying to understand what's happening elsewhere, at least not far from here, I had to develop a relationship with Fergus in a very impressionist manner, with no real equipment of a toolbox, a skill set that I may have acquired prior to that opportunity of working with Fergus through training, education, experiences in professional contexts. So I thought that there was as a curator, and as a member of IKT, I thought that how important could be to actually have a webinar that could work or facilitate a discussion that could help colleagues of mine engage with the topic and understand what are the questions at stake, where are the resources. In the same way, I could have benefited from that 5 years ago. And at the same time, what was happening was that different things were happening in Ireland, in UK, elsewhere in Europe, in the United States, and beyond, that somehow was leading us to a situation where artists traditionally removed from mainstream art contexts were actually having opportunities. And you might have heard that the latest Turner Prize awardee is an artist called Nnena Kalu, who is affiliated with ActionSpace in London, a supported studio. MoMA in New York organized a solo show by Marlon Mullen. Recently, at the end of 2024-2025, is also affiliated with another supported studio, which in the United States they call Progressive, Near Art Center, and most importantly, MIMA organized an exhibition called Towards New Worlds, curated by Aidan with the staff at MIMA, including Ellen Welford, and brought together 15 artists, so large-scale survey exhibition. And this was quite an impactful exhibition in the UK, led to a lot of discussion on the origins of the program through which Aidan was connected with MIMA, but also across the press and so on. So in parallel to this, of course, the more exhibitions we have, the more feedback appears. And these are just two screenshots of a lot of literature, a lot of critical writing that has been appearing in mainstream or specialized press related to the topic. So here you just recently, just this month, Art Review published a very interesting article by Richard Phoenix, where he shares his own experience of working within a supported studio as a facilitator. And Andrew Hunt also wrote a very interesting piece a few months ago. And the lead of this piece says, while works by these artists are slowly entering the mainstream, greater efforts must be made to create inclusivity around the critical and curatorial discourse that enlivens and secures the place of this art now and for posterity. And this is what, for me, was the key point of this discussion. We need to develop a set of skills and knowledge that the majority of us curators working in the field still does not have, or refresh it following current debates in order to equip our practice and our profession with a much more inclusive and diverse approach that somehow enables voices of artists and others who have not been included in our mindset to now be, and with that facilitate a much wider and rich and welcoming art world. So that's the rationale for us being here today. I will now hand over to my colleague Elinor Morgan, colleague and friend. After Elinor, we will hear from Aidan, and we will finish with Róisín. Following that, I will moderate a Q&A. I will start with some questions to all the speakers, and then everyone is welcome to join. Full disclosure, I have a personal connection with Elinor. We worked at MIMA for 3 years, between 15 and 18. And Elinor then continued a brilliant job there, which she's still doing. And it's a great honor and pleasure to actually hear from her. And she has been an essential voice in the UK in the creative sector as a leader and in this area. So thank you so much for all your attention, Elinor. I will now stop sharing. How do I do that? Yes. And hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Miguel. I am going to now hope that I can also share, but it's somewhere else. 1 second. Sorry, I still can't see the part where I can actually show the slide. 1 sec. How's that? Can you see me go? Perfect. Okay. Thank you. And Yeah, thank you so much for this invitation. It's really great to be here having this conversation. It's really heartening to know how many people have turned out. So it's obviously a conversation that people are having or want to have and be part of. And that really fuels me and lots of other people. I know that. So yeah, thank you, Miguel. It's lovely to reconnect through this. And it's also nice to kind of share a stage with Aidan, who I'm going to talk about quite a bit in this presentation. But of course, he's also going to speak from his own perspective, so that's great. So just by way of a brief introduction to me and my position, I am a white woman in my late 30s. I've got large spectacles and sort of fair grey and blonde curly hair. I'm in a domestic room with a green painted walls behind me. And my perspective is grounded in experiences of working across curatorial positions in England. I'm currently an independent curator, as Alfredo said, working as associate curator with MIMA, where I was artistic director between 2021 and 25. And I'm also co-chair of Disability Arts Online, which I'll refer to through the presentation. I'm also disabled, and I'm one of a small number of disabled creative leaders in the UK still. So that really informs my position too. So today I want to talk really about why institutions should be working with DDEF, disabled and neurodivergent curators. I'm going to share the Future Curators programme as a case study of change-making practice, and then I'm going to talk about potential or perceived challenges of this type of collaboration, how to approach making change, and I'm going to close with an invitation for you all to take action, just a reminder that you also have agency here. A small note on language here. Sometimes I say DDEF, disabled and neurodivergent in full, and sometimes I just say disabled as a shorthand, but I mean by that the full kind of range of disabilities. I'm also going to use the term mainstream, but I'm using it in inverted commas, so maybe that's a discussion we could come to later. Okay. So why should institutions be working with DDEF, disabled and neurodivergent curators? Well, I think it's probably not necessary for me to say that we are woefully underrepresented in our institutions and in our collections and archives. There's been a reckoning in our sector to redress historic omissions, exclusions and oppressions, particularly in relation to gender, race and colonial legacies. And there is a very long way to go with all of this work, but I would say we're behind the curve on disability and building disability justice into our museums and galleries. I recently read a report that highlights this issue in relation to the heritage sector that said that 20% of people responding to the survey that formed the basis of the report had left positions in the heritage sector because of issues relating to their disabilities and long-term health conditions. So I think this shows some of the kind of ableist barriers that we need to dismantle. And crucially, I want to advocate that we need to adopt more truly intersectional approaches in our work. Another very important thing to say here is that people want to see, hear and experience this work. Between 20 and 25% of the UK population is disabled. A higher proportion of neurodivergent people are drawn to studying art and creative subjects. But despite this, because of the many barriers disabled people face generally in society and the difficulty in accessing careers and lives in arts and culture, disabled curators and creative leaders are few. But if exhibitions, collections and projects are not being curated by disabled people, people who hold embodied knowledge of disability, what knowledge are we missing out on? How are we connecting with and representing nearly a quarter of the population? How are we working sensitively and respectfully with artists and constituents who themselves are disabled? And how are we speaking to and platforming this huge swathe of our populations? So we need to put this right through nurturing nuanced curatorial work that reflects the perspectives and experiences of the societies it comes from and that it speaks with. by investing in research and discourse that offers disabled perspectives on the past and the present to build the foundations of anti-ableism for the future. And also by supporting disabled artists and curators to formally present, archive and collect their work for future understanding and study. So just briefly, I'd like to share what I perceive as a leading model of collaborative change-making with you. Future Curators is a programme initiated by DASH, which is a disabled-led arts organisation, to create opportunities for disabled practitioners to work as curators in arts institutions, gaining experience and skills to equip them for leadership roles, and to begin a process of sector change through kind of mutual learning that centres disabled-led work in mainstream settings. So the aims of Future Curators are, in brief, to enable, value and celebrate disabled curators and artists, to centre disabled, deaf and neurodivergent leadership, critical thinking, art and aesthetics, and to embody anti-ableism and disability justice work as vital and essential to sector best practice. And the first phase took place between 2018 and 2022, with DASH as the founding, initiating organisation, and 3 visual arts organisations, including MIMA. And then in 2021, as a cohort, we recruited 4 new organisations. And we actually selected from a wider pool of organisations who applied. So there was a lot of interest and appetite for this kind of work, which I think is really important to note. So the group now spans the whole of England and encompasses organisations with a range of scales and programme specialisms. There's a list on the slide, and if it's helpful for me to voice that later, I'm really happy to do that. I'd love to say that the list is beyond England, but for now, for funding purposes, it's sort of contained within that. But I think there's potential for that to grow and shift. And this 8 organisation partnership is a community of learning. So each month we together as a group of curators and cultural leaders, we analyse and share texts and projects together. It's a space to test and try approaches and to invest in training and development as a cohort. The Future Curators programme cohort is powerful. It really centres disabled knowledge and is led by disabled-led organisations. And together, all of these organisations have influence in the sector and beyond, and a huge reach through media and also connectivity with large and diverse audiences. At the minute, where we're at in the programme is that each partner is currently recruiting or embedding a curator who will work with them on programmes across the next couple of years. So kind of changing programming from within. But just to go back a little bit to some of the outcomes so far, I mean, Miguel, you just alluded to quite a lengthy engagement and journey there with KCAT, and this has been similar for MIMA and Aidan working together. We've been working together really for, I would say, since 2018-19, so there's a long engagement and collaboration there. And so Aidan was MIMA's associate curator in the first phase of the programme. And phase 1 saw the realisation of projects and programmes at each venue. So some of these were public programme related, some of them were exhibitions. It's across a range of curatorial practices and approaches. And some were in person, some were digital. This was also during the time of the pandemic. So for example, Aidan developed a digital exhibition with us with 3 new commissions reflecting on the notion of home during the pandemic, and a new text by the brilliant Jade French, who Miguel also referenced, and an accessible online launch event, which we co-produced with Disability Arts Online. And then following his associateship, the Future Curators Partnership commissioned Aidan to lead a series of 3 online sector discussions on access and equity, which again, Miguel referenced, and these were sold out. Again, you know, there's an appetite for this work. So following our initial programme of work together, MIMA committed to work with Aidan on a follow-on programme, which really built on his learning with us and extended his voice as a curator and platformed his work right at the centre of the institution. And so Aidan secured some R&D funding from Arts Council England, and we committed to give Aidan the platform of one of MIMA's large-scale exhibitions, with the associated exhibition budget, team support, organisational infrastructure, technical support, PR resource, etc., everything that goes with one of those shows. And Aidan worked with Helen Mulford, who was then MIMA's curator, now head of programme, to develop Towards New Worlds, it was an exhibition of 15 amazing contemporary artists. Aidan's going to talk in more depth about the exhibition, so I won't expand too much on content here, but I will just say that the exhibition then toured to Disability Arts Online's new purpose-built accessible digital gallery. The show had very large reach through Arts Press and was cited as a model of best practice and visited as a learning resource by many colleagues from across the UK. And I think it is interesting to note that since the exhibition, a number of the artists involved have gone on to show within major exhibitions. So, for example, Sam Metz with Aaron McPeak at Henry Moore Institute, Sir Hai Lee at the V&A, and conversations are ongoing between MIMA and a number of the artists. Centering disabled curators has manifold and extensive benefits for institutions in terms of organisational culture, research and knowledge production, networks and relevance to publics and communities of interest. This is a reciprocally beneficial process. But I think it's important to articulate these benefits really to demonstrate the urgent need for this work, and also that it's not a nice to have, but this should be a core part of our thinking going forwards. So I'll just try and outline some of them from where I sit. Firstly, it's healthy, we know this, to build teams and organisational cultures that centre a range of perspectives. Diverse workforces benefit problem-solving capabilities. Secondly, I don't want to fall into either the trap of further othering disabled practitioners by separating us/them out from a kind of imagined mainstream workforce, or of imagining that disabled people have some kind of magical special powers. Those are two tropes that often appear. But it's important to note that disabled and neurodivergent people navigating our ableist world have to be creative and resourceful every day, in ways that non-disabled people don't even have to think about. And that, like others with protected characteristics and experience of being minoritized, disabled curators will bring underexplored and underrepresented readings of artworks and art history and society more generally to programs and collections. Curators with experience of being excluded and facing barriers also have very useful skills and approaches in working with artists, researchers, and other practitioners. And disabled curators often have strong peer groups built through necessity. So working with us/them in respectful partnerships can build pathways for a broader and less visible community of practitioners to begin to engage with your organisations. Disabled curators will likely be in touch with artists that you're not connected with, and certainly that you're not aware of. And finally, it's really powerful for publics to feel that their experiences, or the experiences of those that they care for and live with, are being platformed. So opening up more discourse about disability and disabled experience attracts new communities to gravitate towards programs. A couple of caveats and notions of caution here. So firstly, it's not the job of a freelancer or an unsalaried or precarious worker to bring about change in institutional culture. This work really has to be taken seriously and undertaken by the people within the organisation and led by those with most power. While minoritized people have embodied knowledge and experiences that are not well represented in our institutions, we shouldn't have to perform our identities through centering protected characteristics in practice. So the work that disabled curators are making is as rich and varied as non-disabled curators, and it could be about any topic. And there are some very real things that organizations can do to improve access, and Róisín's also going to talk about some of these. So I think I'm really interested in, once that process begins, how can you begin to sustain this beyond a single project or a single event? Disabled people are everywhere, and I just want to highlight that it's likely that you're already working alongside disabled and neurodivergent people. So once you begin a process of, respecting and valuing disabled experiences within programs, it's likely that colleagues might come forward. And I think it's important to think about, what can you do to facilitate and sustain that connection and that respect within your own existing workforces. Why aren't we doing excellent, inclusive work all the time then? If it sounds so fantastic and I'm making it possibly sound quite simple, why aren't we all employing and collaborating with disabled curators through all of our projects and programs already? Well, there are many challenges, I think, to centering equity and access within our ableist normative structures. You will probably all already be imagining some of those challenges and barriers, but we know that lots of people want to make change. So I think when talking about access and equity, the kind of key reasons not to make change that come up over and over again boil down to resources, primarily people's time and budgets. And those are real issues, but there are ways, I think, of working around them or changing how we perceive those barriers. But actually, I believe the biggest challenge is a fear of the unknown. I think a lot of people who have good intentions, their biggest barrier of making bigger changes or embarking on new work is a fear of getting it wrong. And that can have consequences. Getting it wrong can be very serious, right? And those levels of severity can vary from looking a bit silly publicly or feeling, a bit silly and uncomfortable, to really harming others. But I think those fears help us make excuses not to do things at all. And working with Aidan and many other people has actually taught me that it's more important to try. That in any process like this, a process of learning, we all make mistakes. But if you do the work to begin with, if you own your mistakes, keep learning and stay open, then people will generally be understanding and respectful. It's not always easy, but it's important to stay with the trouble. So a few kind of learnings that of my own and top tips or approaches. And again, Róisín will be building on this in her part of the presentation. Like with many discussions around access, the conditions for working with deaf, disabled and neurodivergent curators, they just read as good practice for all freelancers and independents. Individuals, of course, will have particular and nuanced access requirements, but here are a few more general thoughts. So make the invitation open and transparent. Share aims, time frame and budget upfront. And try to demystify as much as possible. In our sector, we have a lot of specialist language. Some of it's necessary, some of it perhaps not. So what can you explain along the way or demystify as a process? Establish how people define and describe themselves really early on. So the info that they're comfortable disclosing and the terms that they are comfortable having used about them. And this is important for all aspects of collaboration and creative work. So interpreting artworks, marketing materials, and anything that describes or articulates the person's work and practice. Encourage an ongoing conversation about access. Keep this open and live because new things will emerge as projects develop and access requirements can and do change. And back this up with access docs and comms preferences. So I think for, people who aren't disabled, it's really helpful to share communications preferences. And this can build a really great starting point for collaboration or working together. And then agree clearly between yourself who should have this information, who is it relevant for, because some of that could be quite sensitive. Rework budgets to build in a pot for access. This is something that's often talked about. It's not often done. But this could cover a range of things that can be agreed project by project, including sign language interpreters, additional budget for travel and accommodation, support workers, and build flex into timelines when planning projects. Crip time can require rest and recovery or flex to account for illness and change of circumstances. This is, I think, one of the most difficult things to do within a bigger institution where you're working against very tight production timelines. So it's not something that I've always managed, but I think it's something that should always be part of a conversation. And there are tweaks you can make, of course. And then, I've said this before, but I think it's important to reiterate, don't make the disabled person responsible for the necessary organizational change. Make sure that they are supported to pursue their practice and focus on their project, i.e. they're not a free access consultant. That is a whole different job, and it's paid at a different level too. So finally, a call to action. Let's just close with some, some nudges to you all, and I hope that you might nudge us back in the discussion. So don't lean on excuses. I would invite you to make some notes of some of the small changes you can make to develop more inclusive and accessible approaches. Is there one thing that you could shift today or this week, however small? And take some time to reflect, analyze your work to date, notice the gaps you can bridge and the achievements you can build on, because you will all be on part of a journey of this. You're not starting from scratch, I don't think. And then finally, embed access and consideration of disability into all aspects of your work. If these things are isolated and standalone add-ons, they won't be prioritized and sustained. And then perhaps we can have a whole conversation about policy versus practice, but that's another topic for discussion. Okay, thank you so much. And thanks again, Miguel and Alfredo.
Thanks so much, Elinor. It's almost impossible to convey in 1 second how brilliant and how profound the reflections you shared with us were, and so very nurtured and coming from practice and being directly involved in making change, but also creating opportunities and thriving through that. So Elinor mentioned the Future Curators program organized by Dash with different organizations in England, first cohort, second cohort, and Aidan is an artist, a curator, a writer who was involved with MIMA since the early stages of that process and continued working with MIMA. So we're going to hear now from Aidan, who will share more details about that work and broader reflections from a perspective of an independent practitioner as well. Thanks, Aidan.
Thanks, Miguel. Just set this up. Okay. So I'm Aidan Moesby, and I'm going to repeat some of what Elinor has said on language. I think it's important that I will use me or we when I'm referring to disabled, deaf, neurodivergent artists and the community, as that's the community that I belong to. No one will miss out by including us, but what are the arts missing out by not including us or excluding us, if we use that much more emotive language? And 15 minutes isn't really enough to go into depth at the very considered work that we did at MIMA. We took the time to make something with care and access as a foundation, and the results show that it was time worth taking. So I'm Aidan Moesby. I'm a white middle-aged man with white hair and glasses and a Northern English accent. The slide that you can see also says something about myself, and on the left-hand side there's an image of the periodic table of emotions, which is part of the work that I do as an artist. I'm from a single-parent working-class family in the northeast of England. I'm disabled and neurodivergent. And this context is important when talking about representation, class, social mobility, opportunities, hierarchies of power, and precarity, especially in the arts. And in the UK, working class and disabled people are underrepresented and face pervasive structural and systemic barriers. I'm currently doing a practice-based PhD at Teesside University, which is associated with MIMA in art, climate change, and well-being. This shows an overview of the kind of roles that I have, with artist and curator right at the center, and underpinning that is care and inclusion, equality, diversity. But I have multiple roles, and I'm an aspiring cultural leader believing in social justice and social change. I was MIMA's first disabled curator in residence under the Future Curators programme, and some of this will also repeat what Elinor said. And that first cohort in 2019 was impacted by COVID. And so rather than doing a physical exhibition, I did a digital exhibition, Thresholds, but without replicating the gallery experience. At that time, there was a gold rush on the digital space, but often as inaccessible as the physical spaces that we're trying to replicate. The Future Curators programme had a long onboarding process about access, expectations, and with me not as an access consultant, but as a curator. Authentic engagement and not tick box. I was seen. Everyone knew who I was at MIMA, and everyone knew why I was there. There's inherent ableism and a lack of disability justice in the arts. So this is a model that I've made, the traditional models of curating the disability trinity that you can see on the screen now. Disability is underrepresented, even in other marginalized groups. Disabled people are undervalued in society as people, as contributors, as participants. And in the arts, we are diminished. Our work is less good. It has less social and capital value, and we are less professional. So on the screen, you can see that on the left-hand side, there's a mainstream trinity where the venue, the curator, the artists, and the context is all about the mainstream. And on the right-hand side, it's much more the disability trinity with a disabled venue or a disabled curator, disabled artists showing in a disabled context. And as we move from left to right, increasingly so, the perceived professionalism, ability, cultural and personal value decreases. The working world is structured for the 9-to-5 normative majority. If you can't fit in, then you're often excluded. And the term fit in is particularly problematic, yet it is also endemic. I like the phrase, if we can't see it, we can't be it, which gets to the core of representation. How can young people who are visiting a gallery think, I can do that, if there's no representation? Similarly for the stage or screen. But what if we created the conditions within a curating and exhibition process where the artists could thrive? With time and care and understanding, no less critical to meet deadlines and deliver and maintain professionalism. Following my Future Curators residency at MIMA, I reapproached MIMA to build on the success of that relationship to see if I could do an exhibition. As Elinor said, I got an Arts Council grant to go and visit disabled artists in their studios and do research around the disability arts situation in the UK at the time, exploring some of the structural barriers and that the disabled artists experience. I took the knowledge from that research and took it as a proof of concept to MIMA. They wanted to know why MIMA? Why now? What will it be? So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 27, everyone has the right to freely participate in the cultural life of the community. I wanted to challenge the negative tropes that art made by disabled, neurodivergent, D-deaf artists is of poor quality and is limited to overtly exploring the lived experience. Disabled artists experience a range of external and internal worlds that influence their art, like any other artist, and I wanted to demonstrate that disabled artists can produce critically robust, vital work which could sit in any white cube gallery given the opportunity. Towards New Worlds was never going to be a disability arts exhibition. It was not a survey show or a salon. It was, though, a show with artists who identified as disabled, neurodivergent, and/or D-deaf. This is an important distinction. It was also important to be explicit about this at the outset when talking to the artists. Some of the artists had not previously overtly identified as such, and to do so and show work in this exhibition within this context may affect how they're seen in the mainstream arts world. I'm grateful that some of the artists only agreed to participate because they had seen my previous work and knew that I would make an authentic embedded care and access that we spoke about. I also acknowledge that MIMA took a huge institutional risk on putting this exhibition on. So I've got a research-based process. I go and visit artists in their studios. And it's not always easy to identify and contact disabled artists, even when explicitly looking for them. Many do not have studios, and this is Colin Hambrook in his studio at home. So they don't have studios or active websites, some of them. They work in isolation, not affiliated with an organization or institution, have not been to art college, can't go to openings or sector events due to multiple issues from personal to systemic. How do you become visible to the art world when this is your reality? Using a combination of my informal and formal networks, disability organizations, deep diving the internet, I identified a long list of relevant artists who I thought matched my idea and brought this to MIMA. Disabled artists experience many systemic and structural barriers: class, economic precarity, health, access to opportunities, often intersectional and complex. So working with Helen Welford at MIMA, lead curator, head curator at MIMA, we ensured access and care were embedded as the foundation of the process. This applied to everyone involved in the core process, where we could exert this intention. On screen at the moment, you can see the opening event, and on the left-hand side is artist Jenny Julia Wallenheimonen doing a performance. We looked at the long list and made extensive notes, reducing it by stages through conversations, meetings, video calls, photographs. We distilled through themes, subjects, particular artworks to a working shortlist. And then these artists were visited in person or via video for studio visits. Work was selected considering critical robustness, what it was saying about contemporary times, how the works fitted and spoke to each other, and how they sat within the themes which evolved: identity, care, ecology, and a sensory world. All the time we were looking at critical robustness and the vitality of the artwork. I think it's important to mention access riders, as Elinor alluded to and mentioned. Each of the included artists were asked for an access rider, particularly at the beginning, covering communication requirements. It's like mail, phone, video, and also the times. When's it best to communicate and how best to communicate? We would refer back to the documents, the access riders, and amend them for accommodations necessary around studio visits, travel, collection of the work, accommodation, and the opening and public programme. There is a tendency for institutions to use the, but what if we get it wrong? Or it's too expensive and we don't have the resources. Well, not all access has to cost a lot of money, and some doesn't cost anything at all. And as far as getting it wrong, I try to get away from the binary of right or wrong and blame, because it's just not useful. Learning by failure or acknowledging that it worked for some but not for others would be a much more positive way of looking at things. And that if it didn't work for some, how can we make it do it differently? What would that look like? And sometimes care has multiple forms. So we had to also consider the time frame. This process of the whole exhibition was extended somewhat in time and due to the mindfulness of crip time, thinking of energy levels, sudden illness, COVID, for example, and the complexity of life of being a disabled and neurodivergent person. Some people don't find it easy to work in the mornings due to the effect of medication or personal assistance, but can work later. Sometimes we need to be flexible. It's the same for those artists with caring or parental responsibilities. Access and care is not limited to certain people. It means everyone. Moving on to the artists and commissions. 15 artists were selected across a variety of media, including works you could interact with. And this is one of Aaron McPeak's works that you could touch and that you could flick with your finger or bang, and it would make a sound. 3 artists and also Rachel Deacon is the photographer on all of the MIMA images. 3 artists were commissioned to make new work. And this is a huge statement for an institution to make. Helen and I worked as curatorial producers on these works, as an outside eye, a critical friend, but not limiting or influencing what work was being made. So on the left-hand side, you can see Carrie Ravenscroft made a triptych, Sugar-Coated Feminine Rage, about the female experience of male-dominated medical environments. And on the right-hand side, Joanne Coates made a performative work with her in front of the camera rather than behind it. And there was a unique opportunity for these artists to work at a scale and ambition within an institution, encouraged to creatively play and experiment, but with us as a safety net. And then the final commission was Sam Metz, whose work Instability is on the green plinth. The exhibition was accessibly designed. We considered how different bodies with different needs might move around and interact with the space and the works. A variety of seating was used to enable people to go at their own pace and rest if need be. Information was provided in different formats within the gallery, and works were hung with engagement in mind. Fonts, contrast, colours, lighting, these were all considered as accessible as possible. However, it must be noted that access works best when it's not othered, but embedded. For example, this work by Jenny Julia Wallenheimo-Heimonen, Scarcity of Resources, the video work was shown at a low level with a projector on the floor under the seat. And this isn't just access, but it's equity. Beyond the gallery, I recorded a gallery tour and an audio description of the work, both of which were available to download with transcriptions on the website. The opening was staged in that we had a quiet, soft opening just before the main opening. The galleries were limited to visitors' numbers. It was low sensory. It was COVID safe. Signage and information was clear about the evening events, and we had hosts to ensure not just the smooth running of the event, but who were there facilitating engagement and welfare. Moving on to the final impact and insights, just briefly. It's difficult to get mainstream arts press to visit and write about art shows which feature disabled artists. These are some views of installation view of the exhibition. And particularly it's difficult when Middlesbrough is seen as not an easy place to get to, given that it's 3 hours outside of London. But the press did come, and as Elinor has already said, writing, the art newspaper described the exhibition as groundbreaking, and Wallpaper wrote that it redefines how we experience art. And Ocular recognised that it's also important to acknowledge that it shouldn't always fall to the marginalised artists to lead the resistance against the causes of marginalisation. Following on from MIMA towards New Worlds was Disability Arts Online first exhibition at the Accessible Digitals displays, and several of the artists in the show have gained wider recognition and opportunities, as we've already heard from Elinor, and also Sam Metz, her work Instability, their work Instability led to a commission in Tokyo. Towards New Worlds demonstrated that it's possible to work with a cohort of disabled artists in a structure which works for the individual and benefits the collective, including the institution. I don't exclude myself from this. Helen Welford and MIMA accommodated my needs as a curator. There was an exchange of knowledge, there were difficult conversations to have and challenges to meet. But through conversation, understanding and empathy, all components of embedded care and access, we achieved an exhibition which I'm proud of, that the institution was pleased with, and that the artists involved experienced a positive process. Future Curators programme continues with a new cohort, but what of the individuals? The experience for me was incredible, but what happens now? Am I at the stage of the difficult second album? How can you have a sustainable career as a freelance disabled neurodivergent curator, particularly in the current funding climate, when the space for representation is contracting? How can we ensure the maintenance or increased representation of disabled artists and curators? I remember in COVID, when the talk was of building back better. I'm not sure where that went. I do hope for a day where I look around the room without thinking who's not in this room or who's not at this table. But I am optimistic that we can begin to work slower, with more consideration, more care, more inclusion, and more representation of different voices. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aidan. It was very profound and rich to hear such at length, like the process, but also the reflections, but including these last ones that apply directly to you, but also colleagues that have may share similar experiences. And I think it's really fundamental to highlight, as you said, and Elinor mentioned, how challenging for a museum it probably was for MIMA and is to even consider commissioning, offering the whole space and develop a self-awareness of how not to do things, because that's usually the way we do it, and learn how to actually do it. So we are now going to hear from Róisín, who's based in Ireland. Róisín is an independent curator and writer and artist, but also works at Arts and Disability Ireland. And Róisín is going to share very strong and detailed information and recommendations on how to work with artists, and the questions that have to do with whether we are in an institution or independently, how to frame the relationship. Some of the questions that Róisín is going to address have been mentioned here or there by Elinor and Aidan: access riders, language, communications. So it's interesting to hear from Róisín now, because it enables us to have almost like a summary and an organizational charter of these kind of topics. I am going to share the PowerPoint on behalf of Róisín. Give me just 1 second. So sharing. Okay. Róisín, feel free.
Thanks, Miguel. Thanks, everybody. I'm delighted to be here chatting today to everyone. So, my name is Róisín Power Hackett, and I have a background working as a visual artist, a writer, and curator. In 2019, I was awarded the Art Lab Curatorial Scholarship at the Institute of Art, Design and Technology, IADT, in Dublin. And for this scholarship, I worked at the Lab Gallery in Dublin whilst researching inclusion in and access to the arts for disabled people. It was during this 18-month master's that I got a lot of hands-on and theoretical knowledge that I apply in my work that I'm doing now. I'm currently managing the Arts and Disability Connect funding scheme at Arts and Disability Ireland. This is funding that is just for artists with disabilities. In my role at ADI, I work closely with artists with disabilities. I give them feedback on their draft applications to the scheme and then give further feedback if they're unsuccessful. Arts and Disability Ireland, or ADI, is a resource organisation for arts and disability in Ireland and is very similar to Unlimited in the UK, if you know that. And I don't know what other organisations are similar elsewhere. So slide, Miguel, sorry. Thanks. So because I have disabilities myself, throughout the presentation, I sometimes speak about experiences I've had, and then sometimes I speak about other people's experiences. So I'll sometimes use the pronoun we and sometimes the pronoun they. And as a curator with disabilities who's worked with artists with disabilities in a few different ways, I'm here today to give you some advice on some 3 different points of advice on how to work with artists with disabilities. So number 1, be patient. Number 2, clarity and communication. And number 3, access. So slide there. So number 1, be patient. Disabled people have a lot of different access requirements. However, one access requirement a lot of us have, though it's often for different reasons, is a need for more time, which was mentioned before by both other speakers. Whether an artist has a physical or sensory disability, an intellectual disability, or is neurodivergent, they will need more time. As a curator or artist myself, I feel so much more at ease when I have more time because I have mild cerebral palsy, epilepsy, and dyspraxia, and all 3 of those mean I have less energy and more energy is required for me to do things. So some artists may not know what their access requirements might be. From working with artists at Arts and Disability Ireland, I've noted that a lot of artists don't know what access means. In some funding schemes, they can ask for personal access costs or audience access costs, and they don't even know what that means or what they can ask for. Artists are sometimes fearful of asking because non-disabled people have reacted negatively to our requirements in the past. So there's a need for more time to work out what the access is. Then when planning an exhibition or event, curators need a longer lead-in time. You may need to develop a relationship with an artist over time, maybe a couple of years if possible, doing several studio visits in person. This is often an access requirement for people with intellectual disabilities working in supported studio settings. When I curated A Consideration of All Bodies at the Lab Gallery in Dublin in 2021, I worked with the artist Declan Byrne over the course of about a year, doing 3 in-person studio visits, even visiting at some points during COVID, although not during lockdowns. This artist is based at KCAT, the supported studio Miguel also mentioned, in County Kilkenny. And because Declan is non-speaking, one of the ways we got to know each other was by collaboratively making an artwork together, which is the one on screen there. So the next slide, Miguel, please. So another point is you may not get an artist's CV or artist statement quickly or at all. I've helped artists write their CVs or artist statements sometimes through slowly building up a knowledge of their practice and how they work over time. I have found this can particularly be an access requirement of people with autism or ADHD. I worked with the poet Philip Kenny on a proposal to produce a film for one of his poems as part of an online exhibition. When applying to the open call for this exhibition, Philip didn't have an artist CV, so we had to have a meeting and work out what work he had done and how best to organise it on a CV, and then I wrote it. And the artist still uses the basis of this CV today. Another point is artists may also work with personal assistants, supported studios, or even their parents or partners to do the administrative side of their practice. So you may need to develop a relationship with those individuals as well and CC everybody into emails and include everybody in Zoom calls and things like that. So slide. Thank you. Point number 2, clarity and communication. So when working with artists with disabilities, I find it's really important to communicate clearly and answer any questions we ask you. We need clarity. We need information. Ask artists what form of communication is best for them. However, I find it is best to send information about exhibition plans and studio visits in an email or write it down so it can be referenced later, even if you've already said it to the artist in person. Then send reminder emails. This is often an access requirement for neurodivergent people, but can be handy for a lot of people with different disabilities. Then answer questions. Disabled people will likely ask you a lot of questions about when and where you'll meet them for access reasons, or if there is an access budget as part of the exhibition. We may need to plan meeting you in advance because we may need to ask a personal assistant to accompany us. We may need somebody to drive us, or like in Ireland, for example, if you're a wheelchair user, you may need to tell the train station in advance when you need to use the ramp. So don't assume the artist can travel easily. We may need to know a lot about the places we're meeting in. Is it noisy? Will there be a lot of people there, etc.? We may need to look up directions and know exactly where the place is and what it looks like so we know it's accessible to us. Is there an accessible toilet, for example? Or so we just know where it is because we have a poor sense of direction. These are the things that need to be considered from the disabled artist's point of view before they even meet you, and you may need to change the plans to suit them. They may also need to cancel at the last minute, so communication is everything and very important. Slide. Thank you. So point 3, access. What kind of access do artists with disabilities need? Access for them to meet you, the curator. Nowadays, Zoom is a very useful tool for this if the artist has good digital literacy skills but cannot leave their house. Don't assume the artist has digital literacy skills. They may also need to have a personal assistant join the call with them, or you can give them detailed instructions on how to use Zoom. However, of course, meeting an artist in person in their studio and seeing their work is vital. Access to the gallery to participate in installation of the exhibition, and access to going to the opening. In 2022, I curated an exhibition for KCAT Supported Artists Studio in County Kilkenny called What Am I? This exhibition was in a different building in the same small town as the supported studio. To make it accessible for all the artists to come to the studio, to their opening, and to bring other studio members, the opening happened at 2 p.m. in the day, and there was a big car to bring people from the studio to the exhibition if they wanted to come. These sort of changes to schedules and to transport are important to making an opening more inclusive to people with disabilities who rely on others to drive them or on public transport. Access to do interviews with the press or PR campaigns. If doing PR campaigns or events like artist talks or workshops, consider the access requirement for these too, and ask what the artist is comfortable with doing, because they may be only able to do a certain amount of things in a certain way. During a PR campaign, make sure the artist is comfortable with any reference made to their disability. Maybe they don't want it referenced at all. Make sure they are comfortable with what language is being used. Is it identity first, as in disabled person, or person first, as in person with a disability, or something else entirely? Respect the artist's choice of language. Slide, please. Please ask artists what their access requirements are and listen to them. They may have an access rider, as was mentioned earlier, but as you can see from the point about communication, access comes before you even meet an artist with a disability. However, when applying for any funding, make sure you put in a budget line for the artist's personal access costs. Ask them to help you with this part of the budget if you can. Personal access costs is the name of the funding in Ireland to help pay for whatever access costs they might need. It may have a different name in different countries. Slide again. Thank you. So, where to discover artists who identify as having a disability? Finally, I will end on where to discover artists who identify as having a disability. Most of the ways I look out for artists with disabilities is through Irish and UK organisations online and through social media. Sign up to newsletters. Follow these organisations, festivals and collectives on social media. It's important to note that a lot of artists with disabilities find it difficult to contact curators and galleries, or to turn up to openings or any networking due to their past experiences and access requirements. So get to know the supported studios in your country. Supported studios usually support artists with intellectual disabilities to make work. Irish and UK organisations like Arts and Disability Ireland, where I work, Disrupt Disability Arts Festival in Dublin, and Atypical Gallery in Belfast, which just exhibits work by disabled artists. UK organisations like Disability Arts Online, Unlimited, Shape Arts, and Dada Fest. Smaller collectives and groups made up of artists with disabilities, which usually have a presence on social media, such as the Irish-based Chronic Collective. And then look out for the work of disabled curators and producers, like the three of us here, but also within the Irish context, people like Iarla Ní Fiorish and Alan James Burns. And then finally, Europe Beyond Access is the only EU disability arts project I have done research into. It also focuses on the performing arts rather than visual arts. However, it might be a good jumping off point to finding artists in other European countries. So thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you for Miguel and IKT. And I'm looking forward to whatever questions you might have as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Róisín. It was really interesting to hear you, not only because I'm also based in Ireland and I'm familiar with some of the references, but also listening to such an interesting set of recommendations and how to do things, which is at the end, even if they are very subtle sometimes, or even if they are something that we think, oh, that's obvious, that's not necessarily obvious to all of us. We have around 10 minutes now, Alfredo, so it's not a lot of time. So I'd rather open up to any questions from the audience, because I don't want to monopolize. Unless there is no question from the audience, then I can ask a few questions. But maybe we should use our time to enable others to share any thoughts or comments or questions. There are a few questions. There's already one question to Elinor in the chat, which has to do with something that's Elinor also said. The Future Curators program is currently being operating in England only, and it's funded by, it's organized or led by Dash, who receives funding from the Arts Council of England. Interestingly, Aidan kind of finished his talk by saying the space of representation is shrinking in the current funding climate. So for someone who's not based in England or in the UK, would think, oh, Arts Council of England is actually funding this amazing program. But on the other hand, you have someone directly experiencing and working in the field, contradicting that kind of view, maybe, if I may say. So any comment on that?
Aidan, imagine you might want to say something as well, but I guess my comment is that it feels like we're in a very pressurized time generally, right? In our sectors, as however we want to define them. I do think there's a growing awareness of the importance of this work, but I think the problem is that it's often pitched as a kind of competition for resources. I think there's also a kind of risk that disability becomes a fashionable fad or a trope, that then, you know, it might be fashionable to work with disabled people for a couple of years, and then we move out of that and work with people with other protected characteristics. And I suppose we've all probably noticed that happening with other minoritized groups and people with protected characteristics. And so I guess that's why I started with this, you know, question around intersectionality as well. But I do think there's more of a demand from certain funders that this has to be built into consideration of certainly how audiences and publics engage with programs. You know, for example, in the UK, Arts Council has some small level resources built into funding. So it's definitely there as a bigger consideration. I guess the sort of bigger shift that I think we need to make is around, and, you know, Aidan, you also referred to this, is how to sort of shift the conceptual frame and discourse so that disabled and neurodivergent practitioners, people, aren't folding themselves or bending themselves into, you know, normative structures, but actually where can we kind of change the discourse rather than just the kind of practicalities around the logistics of working with people or people entering spaces. I'm not sure if that exactly answers your question, Miguel. I'll pass to Aidan, I think.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, Elinor. And I think that there is a slight difference between representation or growing representation in the UK of some disabled artists, and the difference in having disabled curators embedded or freelance curators, and now the acknowledgement that it's very difficult for a disabled neurodivergent person to work institutionally. I mean, it was obviously, when I was working at MIMA, I had a lot of accommodations. My access rider enabled that kind of flexibility. But when you're trying to fit in with an institutional structure, that's not always prioritized or an option. And I think there's a difference between artists and curators and the space for disabled curators, especially freelance ones.
That's an interesting point, Aidan. Yeah. There's another question in the topic. Two questions. One is practical. So one is like, like timelines. What do you recommend timeline-wise for curating a show? I mean, identifying the artist, submitting a proposal, funding, and so on. I guess, Róisín, yes?
Well, if you want to follow up after me, Miguel, as well. But I would say it's good to try and get to know the artists now, like begin to know artists, but working with someone like at least 1.5 to 2 years, which is often outside of funding, so you need to know the artist nearly before you apply for the funding, to get to know them, so probably at least 1.5 to 2 years. So before the yearly funding thing, at least in Ireland, the way it works is it's often independent curators or curators that like aren't even working within like institutions, or smaller institutions at any rate. It's a yearly funding thing that we have. So you'd need to know them before that year, I think. I don't know what anyone else. Yeah.
Elinor?
I would just say that it's good practice, I think, to build relationships and trust over time through, if possible, through programs or projects or relationships that can start quite small and build. So, for example, you might invite an artist to be part of an event or give a talk if that's something they're interested in, and build the relationship that way. Because I think that's a gentler and more, caring way to work together than jumping straight into a big exhibition, which often will have, high levels of pressure and visibility around it.
I think there's also something about, we've got to do access and inclusion, and we've got to do everything, instantly. Whereas, like, do one thing and get it right, and then move on and do the next thing, and then you can be seen as somebody who is engaging with the conversation, authentically, and embedding those kind of practices, rather than because failing or being seen to fail by trying to do too much. There's a critical cost to that with it as an institution as well.
Thanks to all of you. I mean, there's a few more questions, but if we have to move on with one which is less practical and more conceptual, theoretical, this is a really crucial question. It says, I'm going to read, I have a question about evaluating, assigning value to and evaluating an artist's critical robustness, particularly if they haven't taken part in mainstream arts education, which usually introduces what curators use for their own framework. So, like, I think the question is clear, but any comments?
I mean, to my mind, that is an incredibly ableist question. And I know that we're in a learning together situation, but it's suggestive that there's only criticality within, within arts education, within the institutions. Whereas, it's like, we need to bring in other measures of what is, you know, what makes something critically robust. Does it stand up? Are they thought about materiality? Are they talking about, like, you know, contemporary times? Are they, you know, how are they, what's the expression? What's the context, the concept, all of that kind of stuff. And that doesn't just exist within the rarefied atmospheres of white cube galleries or, you know, the higher education. Many many artists, outsider artists, disabled artists, are autodidacts. They've taught themselves, and, you know, and make really, you know, poignant, strong, and, you know, we use these terminologies, but, you know, critical robustness, it can hold its own against anything. And there's plenty of art by disabled people or disabled artists that can do that. And it's not the exclusive domain of arts education. Life is also an education and experience.
I would really second Aidan on this, and this is like, there's just so many different ways of educating yourself, or of making art that means something. And in some ways, this answer to the answer there is somehow like what artists with disabilities or disabled artists can actually bring to the conversation around, like, and challenge the institutional way that like the art world is run, which I think a lot of people might criticize, even people without disabilities. And so, you know, yeah, I think it challenges the institution.
In the question, there's a kind of quotes around critical robustness. So I think that is also a reference to your language, Aidan. And I think it's, I guess, just to kind of add to what you're saying, I think one of the missions that, Aidan, that you're on is to make that case really clearly, that disabled artists are making critically robust. So you're sort of using the language of the mainstream back at itself. So I guess I just want to slightly complexify or make more nuanced that question, because actually it's quite powerful to use that language, but it is also problematic. And that's part of, I would say, the contention that you're dealing with as a curator.
Yeah, but I think sometimes you have to use the language which is understood if you're by the people who, you know, you're trying to change an institution. You've got to, like, kind of adapt and flex and use the language which has a commonality. It's not, I mean, I know I use that language, but it's not a language that I would naturally use. But, you know, we are talking about curatorial kind of issues here. And so that's why I chose to use that phrase.
Yes. And we have maybe one more question, Alfredo. It's 4:30 now, or we prefer to wrap up within time?
No, we might have one more question, and then
Okay.
like 3-4 minutes, and then we can close it. I will be happy to have it.
Okay. Sorry. I also want to say that I may have not phrased the question that was raised particularly well, and the person who raised it has answered, has commented on the chat about it. Nevertheless, I think the topic was clear, and the different perspectives were also very important to outline here. There's an interesting question also that says, I'm going to quote, "I have sadly experienced ableism many times by able-bodied curators, and this has been one of my biggest barriers. So I was wondering what your advice would be to try to reduce or surpass this barrier."
I think one of the key things we have to do more of in our sector is more formal training and learning. And when I was reading this report about people leaving the heritage sector, which is, of course, a kind of parallel sector to ours, I think something like 83% of respondents said they'd never had any training in disability full stop, let alone disability, equity or justice, which is maybe the more sort of advanced contemporary version of what we should be doing. So I think that, for me, that would be my response to that horrible experience, is the workforce more generally needs to have mandatory kind of shared learning sessions, because that makes the responsibility a policy and institutional led framing rather than an individual, you know, maybe having to advocate for something that they know they need, but actually everybody needs, and that people won't necessarily voice because that's inequality, right? So I think it would be nice to imagine that people are going to do that learning on their own or in informal settings, but I think actually starting with a kind of baseline of training and education is really important.
Yeah, and I think on that note, I think maybe it's a good time to wrap it up, Alfredo, within time, because Elinor pointed to the critical question, which is if we are operating, and Elinor mentioned mainstream before, questions of representation, the diagram that Aidan showed us between mainstream and non-mainstream organizations, curators, artists, and the perceptions that exist around it. If there is anything, I'm speaking now only through my own experience. I attended a master course in curating 25 years ago, and nothing of the kind that we discussed today was even touched upon. 10 years later, similar, if I had attended the same program, probably. And therefore, without an institutional investment in training, awareness raising, and so on, from a mainstream viewpoint, things will not necessarily change, and we cannot enact change in those circumstances. I leave now the floor to Róisín, Elinor, and Aidan in case they want to just provide a final comment, and then I'll hand over to Alfredo. Thank you all for being here today. I hope for IKT this is also one of many other IKT webinars that may continue the conversation. And for all of us here in Ireland and in the UK and elsewhere, I hope this has been insightful occasion, and the seeds are there. There's a lot to talk about, lots to read, lots to think, lots to engage with, and hopefully we can always follow each other and see what all of us are trying to do.
Thank you, Miguel, and anyone who wants to get in touch with me through either ADI or through my own email, if you Google my name, you'll definitely get an email eventually. And maybe, I don't know if IKT will share that information, but I'm open to anyone chatting with me about anything. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Aidan and Elinor.
Yeah, just a quick thank you. Thank you for inviting me to the discussion. And like Róisín says, I'm happy to receive emails and questions.
Thank you. No, we are happy to share your contact email. And we can, everyone actually is interested, they can access directly to you or through the IKT. In the comments list also I spotted a number of attendees, members who were actually posting different organizations from California to Canada to Portugal to Wales. So you could take a look at it, and but we are here also to share knowledge beyond this seminar. Thank you very much to all. It has been really important and terrific content and insight actually provided. So thanks so much. It has been really an honor to hosting you. Thank you. And have a good night, evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world.